Hello, and welcome back to the ArchFlow framework session series. In the last session, we looked at the ArchFlow foundation phase, and in this one, we'll take a look at the first two design phases of the ArchFlow. This is the logical and the data integration phase, essentially the two design phases which reflect the functional solution design. Before we jump into those two design phases, I think I owe you a description of a couple of the foundational commands that we discussed last time. I don't remember actually going into details for any of those, so let me maybe catch up on that first. So from the last session, we remember actually that we covered multiple commands as part of the foundation phase, starting with the ArchFlow start command to build the project structure, then follows with the ingest requirement, where we actually take the requirements document and then build out the initial set of the foundational artifacts, followed by the context, where we build basically the remaining set of foundational artifacts, including the context document, providing the business context, and then followed by the iteration of a clarify commands to generate the open or analyze and generate the open questions, answer them, and then generating again basically the context artifacts as well. So having said that, let's first maybe look into those commands in more detail and then providing a description for every one of those before we jump into the design phase. So let's start off with the start command. As you can see, basically that's the only command besides the ArchFlow select which actually requires the project ID, because we are just starting now the project with this command and we need to define the project ID, which is a unique identifier, and it's a string which is then also used and to name the folder in which we place the architecture as such and save into the active project file. Then we need to provide the project name in a human readable format, and then a short description basically. And that's everything which is required to kick us off basically and create the project structure, the subdirectories, and copy over and initialize those manifest files that we saw last time. Then let us look into the ingest requirements command. That one obviously doesn't require the project ID, it's automatically resolved, but it needs basically a path to the requirements document and optionally the source type of the document, but that's usually automatically detected by the AI agent. What I did for this example, I just copied over the requirements file into the docs folder and then provided the absolute path to that prompt command, and then the command was executed by the AI agent and created basically the initial set of the foundational artifacts. So that's the ingestion command. Let us now look at the context command. So that's the one which creates basically the remaining set of foundational artifacts. It also doesn't need a project ID, but because we are running that command multiple times, we have the mode parameter, which actually specifies if we want to generate a new set of the context artifacts, or if we are just updating or refining basically the context. So initially, when we are creating basically or running the context command for the first time, we will use the generate one, which is also the default one. And then as we go on and answer basically the clarification questions and resolve them, we can run the refine or use the refine mode with this command to just basically apply those resolve the open questions into the artifacts itself. You can also provide some additional context to that command and bring your own basically context into the artifacts as well with this command, without even having to apply any of those resolved questions. If you don't have any yet, you can bring your own context and discuss basically using this command with the AI agent and update some of the artifacts, basically part of the foundational command of foundational artifacts. Then we have the clarify command, which again also similar, has the same mode parameter with a similar meaning. We have the generate option, which actually is used to initially for the initial run. This basically analyzes all the artifacts and comes up with the gaps, the open questions with the initial list. And then once we go back or want to answer some of those open questions, we can run it basically with a answer mode and then provide the ID of the question and then provide basically also the answer to the question, and then the AI agent will automatically update those open questions as well. By default, we also have the generate mode option selected. You can also specify the focus area where you want basically those open questions to be analyzed, and as well the maximum number of questions that the AI agent should generate to limit basically those open questions that will be generated. The status mode is also something which is interesting, which you can use to show progress so far, how many of those open questions you have at the moment, and what's left to be done. Maybe we can actually now run that command with that mode option. Just so that we see basically where we are at this current project. So once the command completes, we should probably see a list of all the open questions, how many of those are resolved, pending, or in progress, and get some summary. And you can see it basically here. We get a summary about all the open questions which are in pending, in progress, and resolved state. We get them also sorted by priority, and you can also get a list of the recently resolved questions as well. And then at the end, you also get the key open questions actually, which led to some key decisions as well. So that's what you get with the status mode option, and that would pretty much cover the foundational phase. Let's now maybe skip or move over to the design phase. And for that, we open again the README document, and at the beginning we have a short description of those design phases and the commands available for every one of those. So we mentioned some of the previous sessions that all of the 4 design phases that we have as part of the workflow, which include the logical design, the data integration, the security, the infrastructure, basically follow the same process, 3-command process, if you will. The first one is the analyze phase, where we analyze first all the foundational artifacts and information related to that design phase, and the AI agent then comes up with the architectural decisions, with a list of architectural decisions, which is then followed by the ArchFlow ADR review command, which reviews basically, or together with the AI agent, every of those decisions, and comes basically to a conclusion, or we pick basically an option during the discussion, and then based on that information that we have for that specific design phase, together with the foundational artifacts and the decisions that we have made, the generate option is then used to generate the final set of artifacts for that given phase. And the process basically repeats itself, throughout those 4 phases in the same way. Whenever we run the analyze command for any basically of those phases, a set of address decisions or architectural decisions are created, and they are created basically in that ADRS directory. That's where they are located. Maybe we can open one and see how they look like. So at the beginning here, in this example, it was the decision about the architecture style selection. We get some metadata at the beginning, which contains the status of the decision, the phase in what the design phase in what this decision was actually created, creation time, and then when the decision was made, what option to use. Then we get some context describing basically the decision, the background, why it's needed, and from where actually it comes from. All the references here we get as well, and then followed by the number of options actually which are linked to that decision. Usually the AI agent will provide up to 3 options, and every option will basically have a description, pros and cons, why that option is basically a good fit, and then followed by the recommendation of the AI agent, the rationale is behind that recommendation, with some more details basically as such, and the implications of that decision or recommendation. Then, once we run the ADR review command, we basically get to review an address decision or architecture decision one by one. And that's basically where we discuss with the AI agent all the options, maybe introduce our own options into it, override the recommendation, and then finally come to select the best option. And only after we have basically approved and come to a decision on all the architecture decisions for the given phase, we can then go back and run basically generate phase for that, the generate command for that phase, and then generate the artifacts for that given design phase. So basically that's the flow in general. So it basically forces you to go into that discussion phase together with the agent's help to come to the right decision based on the information that the agent has at that point in time. Maybe you can, besides the architecture decision output, look at the command ADR review command. Here, what it does and what parameters it takes. So once those architecture decisions have been created, those artifacts, you can then run the ADR review and provide it basically the ID of the decision that you want to review. And you can also then, use the prompt mode or attribute mode to just select one ADR or basically run it in a single session for multiple decisions as well. But if you select basically or provide the ADR ID, that implicitly means that you are basically discussing only one address decision in that session. And that's usually what you should do. It also makes sense actually to maybe group the discussions about all of those decisions from a given phase, the same session. So the agent actually has the same context when it thinks through and then recommends the right options to the user. So that's the architecture decision review command. Then you also have an option, obviously, to add out of the box decisions which are maybe not identified by the AI agent, and that's done with the ADR new prompt. That one basically takes the topic of the decision that you want to make, and then also the phase for which the decision is important or where it fits the best. So that's basically how that command looks like, and that would cover basically the architecture decision space. If we now go back maybe to the README, so we mentioned that we have to analyze the address review command, and then they're followed by the generate. Maybe we can now look those commands up. So they're pretty much the same. They just, obviously contain different instructions, depending on the design phase that we are doing. But let's maybe go through the analyze prompts for the logical design and the data integration for this session. So let's first check the logical analyze command. So usually those analyze commands don't need any input. Obviously they have all the instructions internally, what they need to look for, what's important, what artifacts from the foundation phase are important to them, and they have already all information available basically at that point to be able to go through, analyze the artifacts, and come up with a proposed set of architecture decisions. So the same, I think, goes as well for the data integration phase as well. You don't need to provide any parameters. We covered the address decisions. Now, if we look at the logical generate command, that one also don't need any parameters as such, because we already have by that point in time made all or resolved all of the architecture decisions. And once we have those, the agent now has basically, together with the available artifacts, the previous design phases, and the address architecture decisions at that point, all the information that needs to generate basically the artifacts important for the design phase. So those are basically the available commands for the two design phases. And maybe we can now look what artifacts actually get created for the logical data integration phase. If we open the logical design, or maybe if we go back to the README, and then in the folder structure, we actually have a good overview of what we are actually creating for the logical and the data integration phase. In the logical design phase, we are actually talking about the components, identifying the components of the architecture, how they are linked, high-level service decomposition, and then we are creating also the logical design overall, and together with some C4 level container component diagrams, including the sequence flows for all the flows that we have identified for the solution. Usually, the C4 component model or man-made diagrams are not included for simple solutions. Only when we have a more complex solution, they will be created. But usually you only, or most commonly, you get always the C4 container model, which is a higher level representation of the components for the given solution. Then for the data integration phase, that's where we actually define our data models, our APIs, our interfaces, entity relationship diagrams, and so on. That's where you find a data model document describing the entities, data entities. Then you have also the API inventory describing all your interfaces. You have the data model diagram containing the data relationships, and then open API specification for any REST APIs, and if you have any events or message specification that goes then into the schema async API folder as well. So that's a brief overview, of the possible artifacts that you can have for any of those two design phases. And now we can take a look at how they look like for this project example. So let's open the logical design. I will just go briefly over that document. At the beginning we have the overview. We obviously mentioned first the architecture style used for this project, which is event-driven service-oriented architecture. In this case, then we see a list of the key architectural patterns used in the solution. Obviously, a list of all those architecture design decision records are listed basically for this phase and their impact. And what follows is basically now a list of identified components for this solution. However, they are listed with key attributes, basically, such as the name, ID, type, responsibility, interfaces available for that component, data ownership, and so on. And the list actually goes on and on. Then at the end, we have the component summary where we have basically all those solution components listed here together with the IDs, and a short overview basically of that list that we show above. Interaction patterns, API communication, synchronous, or list of the APIs, data flows, and so on. Then in the diagram section, we get basically the container diagram. Here, the component diagram is not available because this is a rather simple solution. And then we get all the sequence diagrams actually or sequence flows for the different use cases, basically. So that's what you get in the logical phase usually. For the data integration phase, obviously we have a description or document describing all the API interfaces in the data model. So if you open the data model, for example, we can also see, similar to the logical phase, an overview of all the architecture decisions that are part of this phase or had an impact here and their outcome. We have a list of all the domain entities with detailed description and attributes for those tables actually, and the indexes design of those tables. At the end, then we also have diagram or relationship diagram, basically linking all of those entities together as well, and also the data flows inside the solution or across the components as well is mentioned here. We also have some traceability metrics, exactly which requirements or use cases actually in components are then tracing back to that given entity as well. Then in the API inventory artifact, you get basically an overview of all the APIs, what triggers them as well, what decision records trigger them, and the detailed description basically of all the APIs together with the methods available, example request and response formats, some more details about the rate limit and so on. Everything which was discussed or impacted by those design decision records basically. So yeah, that's that part. We get a data model here as well diagram, and then you get basically in the schemas directory or subdirectory also an overview or documents YAML files basically describing in open API format exactly the APIs which you can then take and hook up into some of the widely available presenters for the open API standard, such as Swagger and so on. So that would be it. We can look up a single API in that open API format and how it looks. So you get basically the detailed description of every API, describing every response and request format. So a pretty detailed basically document for every API set. So that would be basically it for this session. In the next one, we will then go on with the next two design phases, security and infraops, and cover the synthesis phase as well. Thank you very much, and see you later.